Hey everybody, it's Maddie. Today we're going to be doing a brief video about how I build aim training routines. I get a ton of requests like, oh Maddie, how do you build a good routine? How do you use routines correctly? Should I be running routines at all? How do I put one together, etc., etc. Well, today we're going to be going over how to build a good aim routine. Today we're going to be going over the structure that I use to build aim routines, as well as give you guys an example of how I would do an aim training VOD review, and we're going to build a routine from scratch right here for that VOD review. So you guys want to know what it is? Right here. This is the structure that I use to build pretty much all of my aim routines, even for the ones in amped coaching. I try to maintain this general structure. This general pattern. So let's go over this structure. Notice first that all of these ticks or all of these reps are going to be times 1, and this means that we're essentially using the threshold method. I don't do this when I do amp coaching, but for most of the routines that I put out on Twitter and for the resources in my Discord and for my stream, these are threshold routines using the threshold method. And if you guys want to know what the threshold method is, check back on one of my previous videos. I'll link it in the description, where I go over the best way to rank up in the voltaic benchmarks. In terms of building in-game scenarios, this is kind of a structure for aim training. Currently, if I was going to build this for an amped professional, I would probably omit this prime scenario, or at least change it to something that is a little bit more strength focused or consistency focused, and just something easy to end off the routine with. So let's just go over the structure. We're going to start with this opener scenario. And the opener, this is very, very important. So imagine you're just waking up and this is your first few minutes on aim training. And say you don't have a lot of time to spend with aim training. The opener is your first scenario. So this is going to be, in a sense, your warm-up. So people tend to ask me all the time, oh, Maddie, what do you do for your warm-up? What scenarios do you run for your warm-up? If I were going to run routines, and this would be the way that I would do it, the opener scenario is your warm-up scenario. It is very, very important. And this is important to be an easy scenario, something quick, something fast, something to get your hand moving. It's not supposed to be a very weakness-focused scenario. It's not supposed to be a scenario that's supposed to punish you a lot for making mistakes. It's just to get your hand moving. It's just to get you to wake up. It is your opener scenario to the routine. So after you play your opener, your warm-up scenario, you move into the blend into weakness focus. And let me explain what this actually means. So every routine that you have, ideally, should have a overarching goal. It should have something that you're trying to address about your aim. It shouldn't just be aimless. I don't like seeing people who make routines that just jumble a bunch of scenarios together, call it a day, and just let you run it without any direction. So these scenarios, these weakness-focused scenarios, we'll have several of them actually. They help to address this overarching goal. And what do I mean by weakness focus? So say you find a problem in your aim. Say you recognize why you're missing shots. These weakness-focused scenarios are going to address that problem by either disciplining you into removing those bad habits of your aim, or helping you to make consistent the good aspects of your current aiming style or approach. So what do I mean by blending into the weakness focus? Well, we started with an easier opener, a warm-up scenario. This is going to be easier than the actual weakness focus scenario that we have coming. So we want to blend into it so that the transition from the opener into the actual weakness focus scenario is not jarring, and instead it's seamless. Or it feels seamless to you. And this is basically just the scenario to discipline or fix the weakness. So this would be something like popcorn in dynamic if you're trying to focus on accuracy with bounce scenarios. This would be something like, I don't know, like air scenarios for something like reactive. Whereas the actual weakness focus scenario will be highly specific in terms of the error that you're trying to address. And then we're going to just repeat this pattern over and over and over again. We're going to blend into weakness focus, blend into a new weakness focus for as many weaknesses as you have, and for as many problems that you can observe in your aim, and for as much that you want to include in this routine. And then after that, say you get bored of hitting your weaknesses, you can hit an adjacent variant. So we have dynamic in mind, so an adjacent variant would be essentially something inside the same category. So say we have like passive and dynamic clicking. Yeah, passive versus bounce. Passive versus bounce. And they can be even like similar variants. So this could be original passive versus passive reload. And this could be popcorn versus leapcorn. It could be variants like that. And the reason we want to do this is, again, just to make the routine a little bit more interesting so that we're not just hitting weaknesses the entire time. And now we can have something to apply what we've been doing earlier in the routine and something to just reinforce our strengths. Now, you can have adjacent variant weakness focus right after. And sometimes I do that with like popcorn. I'll have like leapcorn as a follow-up to popcorn, just to focus on the arc reading for dynamic. That's basically what this is. And it's got the same idea, probably without a blend, since you're already introducing the adjacent variant. Now, finally, we have the prime scenario. So this scenario, as you guys can tell with the Voltaic Daily Improvement Method by LG56 and my own DCC routines, this is basically the scenario that you are trying to get a high score on. Like, this is what you're working towards. And this is what the entirety of this routine is essentially, as it's said, priming you to get a high score on. So this could be the scenario itself that you were VOD reviewing. This could be like a benchmark scenario. So say this is dynamic clicking, this would be the season 5 passive. This would be the season 4 passive. Whatever you're trying to really focus on and whatever you observe these weaknesses with, you're trying to use that same scenario as a benchmark, and you're trying to use that scenario at the end of your routine. You're trying to play it at the end so that all of this prepared you for a personal best on this scenario. So that was the end of the routine structure breakdown section of the video. And now we're going to go into the analysis section. So I found this VOD. This is a VT Intermediate 115 target, and it's a master score. I found this in the Voltaic VOD-reviews channel. And we're just going to VOD review it. I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to tell you guys like what I'm seeing and what I'm looking for. And we're going to build a routine for it from scratch. So let's just go. So initially when I'm doing these VOD reviews, I'm just looking for like what's causing you to miss shots. Are there any inconsistencies in your aim? Is there anything that looks like a bad approach or that spells bad technique for me? Anything at all. So right there, we have our first good miss there, and it was like 2 instances of it. Let's slow this down. So we can see that we have kind of an overflicking problem. This is really visible if you like zoom in on the screen. I can't do that right now because this is on YouTube. But you can see that he went over the target there, and that's what caused his like micro correction to be rather sweeping. So he had to go back onto the target make up more net distance, and cause him to miss the target. And he did it again right there, right after, really quickly. So definitely an overflicking problem. His micros are really jagged. So what I mean by like jagged micros, it's essentially like you're using a lot of tension in your wrist to control these narrow motions. So say we're going for, say we are going for this target, but we came from this target. Doesn't sort of overflick, but instead of performing the micro correction smoothly or accurately, he'll do it really quickly. He'll do it like a very micro flick back onto the target, making up this correction distance. That's not how you want to do micro corrections. So it's another thing that I'm seeing. And you could see how poor flick landings and poor micros are just killing his fluidity here. So he's just not moving through these targets as quickly as he potentially can. Otherwise, his flick speed looks pretty good. It's just probably a tension problem for the micros and just a poor approach when it comes to landing his flicks. And another thing is that I think his accuracy numbers are pretty low for wide ball 5 targets. This scenario is fast-paced, and it's not accuracy scored, so it's obviously going to be a little bit more freedom when it comes to going through these targets, but I don't like seeing 90% accuracy. You should be sitting at like at least 93 to 95% accuracy for a scenario like this in static. So now that we're done with the analysis and the VOD review section of the video, we're going to jump into actually building this routine. So this is going to be a static clicking routine as per the VOD review that we did of the static clicking scenario. And this was just going to call demo routine. So now we're going to find scenarios in Kovacs FPL Aim Trainer that conform to the exact structure that I showed you guys at the beginning of the video. The approach for building routines, that is my approach. Now, something that I do want to mention is that this would probably be a case where having an aim coach would be pretty beneficial, because if you're not well versed in Kovacs scenarios and what purposes they serve, this can be kind of a struggle. I'm not an expert at it either, even with many hours. But if you're not well versed, you could just search wide wall, since we know that we were dealing with a wide wall scenario. And if we don't want to try each of these scenarios, so something that I do is I specifically go through any of the scenarios that I want to put in my routine, and I actually play them, I try, and I full sweat them, just so that I could figure out like what is the limit on this scenario, what purpose is it serving, is it the right purpose for my routine, do I really want it in my routine, and what am I getting out of it. So if I'm not too familiar with most of these other scenarios, and I don't want to waste my time, but I am familiar with voltaic. This is wide wall 3 targets voltaic larger. That sounds like a good opener. It's easier than the original wide wall 3 targets voltaic scenario because the targets will be bigger, and I'm already familiar with the variant. So this seems like a good scenario to include in the routine. And what I want you to do if you're building a routine, I want you to make sure that you play it. And make sure that it feels good for the purpose that it's serving. This feels pretty easy for an opener, so I think it feels good. And it's a good warm-up scenario, so first scenario in the routine. The next scenario that we want to try and find is something that will address the first weakness that we saw. So we want to find a blend into this weakness focus, so it's not going to be too difficult. And the first weaknesses that I saw was poor flick accuracy, so poor flick landings, or shaky flick landings. And the scenario that we use to address that problem is known as Pokeball. Pokeball scenarios. These are essentially static clicking scenarios that feature targets with a certain amount of HP, so it's not just one click to kill, and you have to hold mouse 1 or fire onto the target the entire time until it dies. And what this does is it punishes you for having poor flick landings. Now I want an opener, so I'm going to see if I can find something here that is a little bit easier and closer to the scenario so that we can blend it. Okay, so I was able to find Pokeball wide RM easy. I like this scenario, I think. Let me try it. As we can see, you probably can't tell, but I have to hold mouse 1 on these targets for them to die. And what you can do to find out if the scenario serves the purpose that you want it to serve is you could try to exaggerate the issue that you see with yourself. So let me try to banana FPS flick. Flick really drastically. You can see how these targets don't die very quickly, and I'm struggling with my fluidity, which is the same problem that we saw in the VOD. So this looks good to put in the routine, and this would be a blend scenario. Next up, we want to find the weakness focus that is full difficulty, or a one that is full difficulty. So we're going to go with Pokeball 1 more 4 targets, 30%. This is a very good Pokeball scenario, and that will be the third scenario. I'm just going to play it, and you can see that this is a lot smaller targets and will punish you a lot for having poor flick landings. So another issue that I saw in the VOD review was jagged micros, or just in general imprecise micro corrections. So something that we could search for is a scenario that features targets that move slightly, targets that will try to strafe a little bit just so that you can focus on that micro correction. So this would be less of punishing bad technique and more of reinforcing what you want to be doing in the scenario. So scenarios that do that instead of clicking are VBR scenarios or vibrate scenarios. So these would be targets that'll just be shaking just a little bit on screen, and that'll force you to pay attention to your micro, otherwise you'll have really bad accuracy. So let's find a blend scenario. I'm searching VBR. Again, I'm not too familiar with all of these. This says easy on it. When you're looking for a blend and you're looking to prepare yourself for the actual variant, easies are good keywords. So let's try this. As you can see, these are larger targets. You can see that they're kind of moving, like moving ever so slightly on screen. So that is good. So if you go too fast and don't pay attention to your micro, you'll end up missing. So that's perfect to go into the routine. Next up, we want to find the actual vibrate scenario, the actual weakness focus. So let's just do the same thing. Let's go to 1 wall 4 targets and let's search VBR with it. We get some variants here. Let's go with this one. Now this might be pretty difficult for Voltaic Master, as we saw in the VOD review, but this does do the trick. Like, I have to pay attention to my micros as I play this. So I think that would be a good scenario to include in the routine. And as you can see, I'm playing through each of these, and in a real scenario building process, which would take much longer than what I'm doing here, I'm going to be testing these, and I'm going to be constantly thinking about, what does this scenario do for me? What am I getting out of it? What purpose does this serve for me? Just constantly be asking yourself that as you test these scenarios. Trust me, like, you want to have a goal, you want to have a direction when it comes to your warm-up and just preparing yourself for these aiming situations. Now, at this point in the routine, we have a couple scenarios left for an adjacent variant. Now, since this is static clicking, we could just go back to like basic one wall X scenarios, but I want to try and combine these two with wide wall. So let's go with wide wall for targets. This is a scenario that I know features small targets, so let's go with wide wall for targets small on a really wide angle. So let's play it. As you can see, this is like a lot of off-screen flicks. So it's got the targets that are the size of a one wall X scenario, but on a really wide wall. And as you can see, I'm trying to play while talking here, and I have to pay a lot of attention to my micros because these are off-screen flicks. And that's going to be pretty good for focusing on your flicking technique and your accuracy. And then I want to try to find maybe another blend with Pokeball. Let's go with Pokeball Frenzy Auto. This could just be another Pokeball scenario. This is also good. You could also go with, say, reflex flick or other reflex scenarios, or maybe a really flick heavy scenario like a 360 map. You could do a lot of things at this point, but we're just trying to keep this routine pretty basic. So these would be essentially the adjacent variants, or the variants that are very tangential to the actual scenario that we're trying to work on. And then finally, we're going to have the prime scenario. Now, this could be any benchmark. This could be something that you want to get a high score on. But just for the VOD review, we have wide wall of 5 targets. And I think it was the intermediate version. So this was the scenario that the person was trying to PB on. And this is the one that we VOD reviewed. So we want to include that at the very end, right here. And this is going to be their routine that we built just from a single VOD review. Now, obviously, when I do like in-game routines, it's going to look a lot different. And I'm going to try to be a lot closer with the client or with the whoever I'm working with. And this is essentially like the kind of structure that I'm going to stick to, but the scenarios will be different, the goals will be different, etc., etc. Now, I know that to some, this process is probably a little bit confusing. So I just want to say that this is probably where an aim coach would be beneficial. Really, there's 2 cases where you want to get an aim coach. The first case, which is what most cases are with pros and with people in the AMP program, is if they don't really have the time to be analyzing and diagnosing all of these aim issues. Like, they don't have the time to just sit here and spam Kovac scenarios like I do to build a routine like this. So that would be the first case, and that is the case with most pros that we deal with, and they just don't have the time. They should be spending that extra time trying to win tournaments, trying to practice to win tournaments, and playing the game. And this is just meant to be supplemental for their aim. The second case is if you are really not well versed in Kovacs or aim trainers in general, and you just have no idea what scenarios to look for, and you have no idea what problems you're experiencing when you play these scenarios. So when you VOD review, you can't really tell what issues you're experiencing. You can't tell why you're missing shots. And you don't really know the kind of resources or information that you need to know. And if you don't want to go through all of that, and you don't want to, do a deep dive into aim training, you could just get an aim coach and they'll tell you what you need to work on themselves. Now, as always, instead of doing that, I always encourage you to VOD review yourself, to try and pick up some of these concepts and see what you can do to help improve yourself, and see if you can make a routine like this that feels good for you and fits your preferences and addresses the problems that you're seeing. So with all of that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys learned something. Please try to make routines. Please try to take this framework that I've been giving you and, make a couple quick routines for yourself and share them with me in my Discord, in the community channel. If you guys want to see me build routines more on stream, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Happy dot clicking.